remote workforce, brought to you by the Identity and Access Management company, Okta. For this online event, the hardworking editorial staff at Redmond Magazine and Virtualization and Cloud Review have brought together some of the best independent experts on today's topics. Thank you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your host for the first of 3 sessions. But before we get underway, I need to go over a few housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is going to be recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording that'll be coming your way within the next few minutes. Within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our very best to get to all of them. Our sponsor, Okta, has provided some resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to check those out. And last but not least, at the end of the 3rd session, one lucky attendee will be receiving a Nintendo Switch. Part handheld, part console. It's the only gaming device you'll ever need, but you must be present to win, so stick with us. And now let's get to our first session, the new reality, how COVID-19 changed everything. For this session, we've called on technologist, content creator, and senior resultant, Howard M. Cohen. In his 35-plus years in the IT industry, Howard has held senior executive positions in many of the industry's top channel partner organizations, and he currently writes for and about the IT channel. He is a sought-after speaker at IT industry events. He's presented recently at Microsoft Inspire, the Citrix Synergy Summit, ConnectWise, IT Nation, and the Cloud Partner Summit, among many others. Needless to say, this isn't his first rodeo, and we're in for an informative session. Take it away, Howard.
Yeehaw, John. This is not my first rodeo, huh? And you gave away that this is really a recording and not us live. How could you do that? Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for attending our session today about the new reality in the post-COVID era. A lot of the content you're going to see, not only from my session, but the other 2 sessions, is drawn from a seminal publication that came out recently, written by our editorial director, Scott Becker. It's called How the Pandemic Flipped Everything in IT, from how users work to IT spending to near-term planning. And because Scott wrote this, I just wanted to honor Scott. This coming slide, here it comes, is Scott Becker's favorite slide. Every time I do a presentation about data, I talk about how data is the new bacon, and I put up this slide, and Scott just never stops talking about it. So I wanted to get myself in trouble by putting it up there today for you. Okay, now that we've gotten our appetites in order, let's take a little trip, and let's go meet a nice gentleman. This gentleman, well, let me first tell you what he said, okay? Because what he said is what's most important. What he said was, work has become an activity, not a place, not a destination. It's not somewhere you go. You don't go to work. You get to work. Just get to work right where you are. But the gentleman is Robert Frankenberg. And for those of you who are too young to remember Robert, and I'm sure you're all raising your hands now, Robert Frankenberg happened to be the chairman of Novell right after its founder, Ray Norda. So he's kind of like the Satya Nadella of Novell, except not so much, given where Microsoft is and where Novell ended up. Anyway, the thing about this is that Mr. Frankenberg said this at a meeting of the Massachusetts Software Council in 1994, which means that he's right, work has become an activity, not a place, but it took 26 years and a global pandemic to make it happen. Sometimes the requirements are pretty steep. Okay, so here we are back in today, and I'm supposed to talk to you about the new reality. I'm still getting used to the old reality, but the new reality in the post-COVID era, after the pandemic, we're not quite through the pandemic, and quite frankly, a lot of what I'm going to speak to about today is still in process. It's still changing. The first thing to start with is how disruptive was the pandemic really? And the answer is totally. Everybody went home. In every office, everywhere, everybody cleared out all around the world. And when you think about how amazing that is, how insane that is, you realize that this was probably the most disruptive event we've ever experienced on planet Earth, other than Noah's Ark, and the dinosaurs dying off, stuff like that. But here we are. Everybody went home. So with everybody gone home, with all this disruption, of all the things that changed, what was the most profound change? And I submit to you, and here's a little clue, what was the most profound change? Meet me. Acceleration. Everything accelerated. I mean, for example, 26 years went by, only a few people working from home, and now everybody's working from home. Acceleration. Those things happen faster. People immediately got on Zoom. Why Zoom? Nobody knows. Could have been Teams, could have been WebEx, could have been GoToMeeting, could have been any one of a number of platforms, could have been Uber Conference, but it ended up being Zoom. And so everybody's on there. We've seen bar mitzvahs on Zoom. We've seen funerals on Zoom, weddings on Zoom. You name it, it's been on Zoom. We've seen acceleration of the way people collaborate. People are much more adept now at working together. It's forced them together. And we've sped up the tools and the methods and the platforms that we have. And we've accelerated the way in which people work together. Another thing that we've accelerated is the acceptance of some serious disinformation. No, not the disinformation you've been thinking of. The disinformation that a lot of people felt that the farmer's shadow was the best fertilizer. Ridiculous. Okay, the farmer's shadow is not the best fertilizer. You don't have to be there to be managing people. This is a commonly held belief that I believe kept us from moving to work being an activity. People wouldn't allow people to work anywhere but where they could see them and walk up to them and talk to them. They talk about management by wandering around. You had to be there. And we've really discovered that people can indeed work when their boss is not standing over their shoulder. How amazing is that? So, I mean, good news. Another thing that was accelerated in one way or another was the concept of a digital transformation. Many people felt that their digital transformation was accelerated, while there are others who say, well, gee, it put a complete stop to our digital transformation. We just ground to a halt. And I'm going to submit to you later that one of those kinds of people were right. The other group wasn't right at all. And we'll see that shortly. Okay, so with all this acceleration, one of the things that was significantly impacted was progress we were making in how we use the cloud, the role of the cloud. We've been migrating to the cloud for 15, 20 years now, and a lot of people accelerated their migration to the cloud due to the pandemic. Why? And here's why. Back in the old days, we all worked in office buildings, right? And so everybody was connected to the local area network that ran throughout the building, and we all shared resources, we all communicated with each other, and that was terrific. Some people once in a while needed to work from a hotel or work from home. It's very possible they wanted to work from home, no problem. If they really wanted to, we had great remote access solutions that we could simply use to connect them into the LAN. And while it was slower, they still were able to get at their data, get at the resources, communicate with others. And then we started developing some interesting strategies like BBI for making it faster. Okay, so we're all running really, really well now. Then we started using the cloud. And many companies just connected the LAN into the cloud, and people, wherever they were, working from home, working from another office, working from a branch office, they all connected in through the network and got to the cloud. Years rolled by, and we started moving some resources to the cloud. Some of our servers ended up in the cloud. Some of our storage ended up in some applications. We just sourced it directly from the cloud. And so it kind of made sense now to get a remote access connection both in the office and at home and always be able to get at those resources. And interestingly, that kind of created a certain amount of parity. It leveled the playing field. If you were in the office or if you were at home or if you were in a hotel, it didn't matter. Your access felt the same. The experience was relatively similar. To some extent, that was a good thing. Okay, then comes the COVID pandemic. Anybody who was in this particular kind of state where they had all of their resources in the cloud, great. Send everybody home. They can connect to the cloud with whatever they've got, their kid's computer, their laptop, whatever their toaster oven, whatever they have that can connect to the cloud, they can connect to the cloud and they can do their work. Fantastic, except for one thing. And this is the thing about the new reality that I guess is not so positive and is something that we really need to take very, very seriously and examine and think about. The expanded threat surface. Okay, we have seen a huge uptick in security exploits, in attacks, in hackers having their way with us. Most recently, the Colonial Oil exploit, where they shut down the Colonial Oil pipeline for a week. Horrible. Even worse, they messed with our meat. The SBS meat packing plants were ground meat packing plants were ground to a halt. I didn't even mean to make that pun, but indeed, everybody was stopped. And now all of a sudden everybody's very sensitized to the problem with data and network security. And well, they should be. They always were. It's been amplified, accelerated, if you will, by the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's the problem. In the old days, when you worked in the office building, this was your threat surface. Okay, it was the area around your building, the network leading up to you, getting toward you. You could certainly scan it. You could manage it. You could monitor it. You could even go threat hunting in it. And you were able to achieve pretty good protection for yourself by keeping on top of that threat surface and making sure that you stopped anything before it got in. Prevention, not protection. Prevention. Don't even let it get close. Well, then some people went home. And of course, each home also became part of the threat surface. Okay, now, there's a huge difference between the way in which an office building connects to the internet and the way that a home connects to the internet. And there's nobody on this webinar that doesn't know that. Home users use residential internet access. And residential internet access is not necessarily as secure as the corporate enterprise level connections we use in our offices. Worse, the devices that are on them are probably not as well protected. It's suffice it to say that a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, will be pulling his hair out trying to figure out how to protect that home device as well as they could protect their office. And the problem doesn't stop there. Because we don't just have a person working from home, we have everybody working from home. And so every home becomes an extension of our threat surface. We become, you talk about hitting the backside of a barn. This barn gets bigger and bigger and bigger as more and more people go home to work. And so this is a cause for panic amongst network managers who are responsible for data and network security. One of the solutions that's emerging that is potentially will help with this is SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, in which you basically get security as a service, firewall from the cloud, if you will. Everybody gets their protection through the connection. There are some other components, however, to SASE that we'll be talking about shortly. But I wanted to introduce the concept that we are seeing a migration from the kind of protection we've depended upon for years to a new way of doing it that has gotten this wonderful, funny name, SASE. And of course, everybody is saying, hey, let's get SASE. Okay. I earlier mentioned digital transformation. And I wanted to put it in context here, as well as I put it in context in terms of security and also in terms of how we proceeded. A digital transformation. This is a term that has been about as overused as cloud. If you talk to 100 people, you'll probably get 100 different definitions of what a digital transformation really is. Sounds pretty simple. Oh, so you're transforming your digital world, but that's probably misleading. Some people envision it this way, that we're taking people and replacing them with technology. And so you're being transformed into a digital being. That's hopefully not true, although a lot of the most brilliant people in the world express concern about that. That's not what we're talking about here. Other people, simply refer to any upgrade of your digital estate, your network, your data center. When you upgrade it, update it, and change out what you had for what you want to buy, that's a digital transformation. And no, it's not. That's not a digital transformation. That is what we refer to as an upgrade. Okay, it's an upgrade. It may be a forklift replacement. That's a big upgrade, but it's not a digital transformation. I submit to you that instead of that, a digital transformation is a major change in the way people like us utilize technology, in the way in which we apply technology to solve problems, to make work better, make work faster, and to enhance the quality of our lives. I mean, there's no reason not to do that. People talk about the customer experience, and other people have pointed out that the employee experience is critical to creating a better customer experience. Happy employees will create happy customers. And it's been proven true over and over and over again. So digital transformation, the way that I've seen it in many of the things that people are talking about today, is defined by how people change the way in which they use. People transform the way in which they use technology to improve their lives, make their work better, make their work faster. Let's have a couple of examples. Okay. First example. Here's a factory, and in an assembly line, you'd have people doing various things. Some of those things were as simple as putting something on top of something else, or checking off check marks in a checkbox on a checklist, or flipping through papers to copy the information from those papers, which probably came from the computer, onto another computer. Repetitive work. things that were just done over and over the same way every time, no decision-making involved, or maybe some minor decision-making involved, but, grunt work, if you will. And of course, we've seen how process automation can take people who are doing simple, basic, repetitive tasks that have to be boring the daylights out of them and automating them. Let automation do that, and then the people can go off and do much more interesting work, much more fulfilling work, much more profitable work. And so, yes, artificial intelligence and machine language have expanded the ways in which we can use process automation, and people, like Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, God rest his soul, they have written extensively about how people have to be frightened of artificial intelligence. So take it from where it comes, folks. But process automation is really meant to simply take people out of the equation when it comes to simple stuff and let them do much more interesting stuff. Okay. Also, we've discovered something else. And this goes back to that whole thing about the farmer's shadow being the best fertilizer. People do work. So I'm going to ask you, what do we measure? Do we measure the number of hours? You see the stopwatch here in the back of the person working diligently. Are we really measuring the time they spend? Is it crucial to us that they arrive at 9 and they leave at 5 or whatever their shift happens to be? Maybe in some cases. There are some cases in which people have to work together, so they need to arrive at the same place at the same time to do the same thing together. Got it. But the overwhelming majority of employees, it's not so much their time, the time that they put in, that you're worried about. As my friend John pointed out, I call myself a senior resultant. That's because, to me, the most important thing are your results. If you get no results, all the effort in the world doesn't matter. And let's apply that here. What we really want to measure is this gentleman's results, the outcome of the work that he's doing. Okay, if he has 15 things to do today and it takes him 8 hours to do it, and he's done all 15 things, fantastic, great. If, on the other hand, he is an emissary from the Speed Force and he can get all 15 of those done in the first hour, I say let him go have fun. I don't care how many hours it takes. I care about getting the results. You get the results, you win. So how can we measure results without measuring the time? And I suggest that workflow automation is the solution. Workflow automation can cue people to do the next thing they need to do. It can create the connection between automated processes and human processes. That's great. And it can also give that human being the ability to indicate when they have completed their work, that they're finished, their task is done. And so that data is collected. Not only collected, it's transmitted to their manager or supervisor. So now that manager or supervisor knows that, okay, the first thing was done. Okay, now the second thing, the third thing, the 15th thing. This person did all the things that I have assigned them to do today, and they did it in just a few hours, so I got to assign them more things tomorrow. No, seriously. What we've achieved here is remote management, the ability to see that your people are getting done what they need to get done. It's kind of like going to work and getting to work. Well, when you get to work, we want you to get done. And we can measure that using workflow automation. Okay, so now we know when people are working. We know that they've gotten things done. The fact of the matter is that people in a digital transformation like this, they're working from home. It's not uncommon that they start work when they would ordinarily leave on their commute. And they keep on working until they would ordinarily get home from their commute. Now, that's more hours than they used to work, might be 2 or 3 hours more than they used to work. That's 2 or 3 more hours of work out of every employee who does that every day. And who asks them to do that? Nobody. Nobody. And this is why the farmer's shadow is such an incorrect, such a false value. You don't need to see them. Let them work from home. Let them get their results, because most people aren't really very satisfied until they've gotten their results. They feel better when the work is done and it's not hanging over their heads anymore. And so you see many people working more hours than they've ever worked before. You see people who are not being tapped on the shoulder and asked questions all day long in the office, not being asked to help somebody else who can't figure out what they're doing, not hanging out by the water cooler, gossiping about who did what to who. All of that goes away, and we're now in a very different social environment in which these people can be left to do what it is they do. And every survey, every study has shown that people are, by and large, much more productive when they're allowed to work at their own pace, in their own environment, comfortable on the device of their choosing, connected to the network, and able to easily report their accomplishments using workflow automation. Okay, so we've dashed that farmer shadow thing on the rocks. We're watching everybody's results. Everything seems to be moving swimmingly. So what about all those people who were complaining that the digital transformation got stopped in its tracks? Those people are the people who defined digital transformation as an upgrade, taking out the equipment they had and putting in new equipment. It's a digital transformation. You're transforming from last year's server to this year's server. That's not a digital transformation. And so these people are crying, it slowed us down. It stopped us. We couldn't complete the upgrade. We couldn't complete our digital transformation. That's a fallacy. That's simply wrong. Those people weren't in the midst of a digital transformation. They were in the midst of an upgrade. And if they got held up in their upgrade, they'll wait till they get back. And most of them probably moved everything to the cloud instead anyway. By the way, this photograph that you're looking at right now, I have to admit it's kind of the wrong photograph. This is not an upgrade. This photograph happens to be of the first delivery of electronic computer equipment to a private office, taking place in 1957. 1957. So there was no equipment to replace. This is a new installation. I was 2 years old. My God, that was a long time ago. Okay, so those are the people who felt it slowed them down. On the other hand, there were other people who realized that necessity is the mother of invention. And so they very quickly figured out how to get everybody working. Think about it. Millions and billions of people all over the planet going home to work from home, all at the same time. And yet we managed to make it happen. We're an amazing planet. And so all these people felt like, hey, this thing that sped us up, it forced us to use our creativity. It forced us to be more innovative and to figure out better ways, newer ways, faster ways of getting done what we've always gotten done. And so now people are doing things in a way they never did before. That's where this new reality is coming from, that the necessity was the mother of them figuring out newer, better, faster ways, more efficient ways, less costly ways of doing what they did before. So if anybody's looking for a silver lining in the dark cloud that is our pandemic, the silver lining is that a lot of people, probably all those people who went out and got vaccinated right away, those people also figured out how to get things done when the chips were down. And I celebrate them. One of the things that we got used to that was not the way we used to do it before was that we got used to video. A lot of people didn't want to do video. I'll share a secret with you. If you go to Skype and you ask to connect with me on Skype, underneath your name, you can put a little saying underneath your name. Underneath my name, you'll see a saying that says, "Don't worry, I look like crap too." Because everybody always complains, they look awful. Oh, my hair isn't done, my makeup isn't on. That's a complaint I make all the time. The reality is that people take you as you come, and people got more accepting of that during the pandemic. But what happens is, as you start to use video more and more and more, first of all, you become more comfortable with how you yourself appear. But you also find that the glass that you're looking at disappears. It dissolves, and you're looking at the person on the other end. And instead of just getting sound like you do on a telephone, you're getting all the paralinguistic cues, the look on their face, their gestures, the way they move their head, their posture. All of these are paralinguistics. And you didn't have those on the telephone. Now you do. So video represents a tremendous step forward, and it's a mystery why we didn't get used to it a whole lot sooner. I say that because where we had 26 years to make Mr. Frankenberg's prediction of work being an activity, not a place, we had 26 years to make that come true. We've actually had 56 years to get used to video. What you're looking at is a product called Picture Phone, introduced by Bell Laboratories, and this is taking place at the 1964-65 World's Fair in Flushing Meadow Park in New York City. I'm not too proud to admit that I actually did the same demo that this lady's doing at that pavilion at that time. I saw Picture Phone at the 64-65 World's Fair. It was amazing. It was mind-shattering. It was probably very motivating to where I am today. And yet, it didn't get adopted. People were resistant to it, and Bell never introduced it back then. It took decades before video became popular. Today, 56 years later, of course, the pandemic has helped us see that video is absolutely acceptable if we can't be in the same place at the same time. Now, this has the promise of changing the way in which people do their jobs. We may not see so much of a return to business travel. People may start traveling just for leisure, more and more. Just like commercial real estate, the airlines may have a lot to worry about, but companies have to look forward to reduced budgets, cost plummeting, where they don't have to send people flying around the world. They can have them sitting and looking at a screen and talking to each other. People are much more comfortable with it today than they've ever been. Another thing that people have become much more comfortable with is the whole concept of collaboration. Yes, in terms of collaboration, they don't have to get into a conference room anymore. They don't have to get into a workroom anymore. Everybody can jump on a Zoom conference or a Teams conference or some kind of video conference, and they can all be seeing each other. But that's not, if you act now, there's still more. People can be sitting they're at a computer. Think about it. They're at a computer looking at each other. Well, why don't they just flip over to a document and start editing it? And today, of course, they can all edit it simultaneously. This is not new. This was introduced probably a decade ago. And people have been using it, but I guarantee you the use of it has been multiplied, by orders of magnitude thanks to the pandemic. So you're working on paragraph 1 of a document. That woman next to you is working on paragraph 2. The gentleman next to her working on paragraph 3. The last lady up there, she's working on paragraph 12. You can see who's working on what, so you don't crash into each other. And you can still be talking to each other in the video conference. You can flip back to the video conference if you want to have a deeper conversation. The good news is you've got this amazing flexibility that spans the globe. You can be anywhere on the planet and be working with each other using simultaneous editing technology. Another technology that has grown in popularity is simple, basic texting. The fact of the matter is, you can check me on anywhere you like, there are more texts being sent on planet Earth every day than there are phone calls, by an order of magnitude, millions. Millions more texts going around than there are phone calls happening. Okay? People are texting. And I'm not talking about just teenagers asking who's going out with who tonight. I'm talking about business people finding it much more convenient to simply send a quick text to somebody and get the response whenever it comes in. That whole asynchronous quality that we always had with email has been made even quicker and more facile using texting, simple texting. And it's not dependent on the internet because it still travels over phone lines. And so it is a backup to the internet that we all like to message over. All of a sudden we've got some redundancy built into our messaging. A lot of good reasons to love the idea that texting has become as popular as it is and that it's available to all of us. There are certainly more smartphones on the planet than there are people. Think about that. Why not text with each other? Just about everybody can receive it. And especially in business, just about everybody is given some kind of smartphone and some kind of tablet. I'm told that most people now have 3 to 5 devices connected to their corporate network. Kind of scary. But great. Texting, much easier, and again, motivated by what we learned during the pandemic. Once again, I'm going to come back and go a little further talking about what we talked about before, the expanded threat surface, the fact that it's not just your office, it's your office and everybody's homes that you have. And as a matter of fact, even those people who are texting from the street at a hotel, you will fax from the beach was an AT&T ad back in the 1990s. People are sending documents from the beach today. So this is all your attack surface. And that means that you've got to be much more conscious about data and network security. One of the things we've learned we need to be most conscious of is endpoint security. Why? Well, simply because the endpoints are the easiest place for cyber criminals to enter your network, just like the place where you enter your network. And so they need to be very, very well protected. And remember, endpoints are smartphones, tablets, laptops, desktops, servers. There's all kinds of endpoints all over the place, and everyone needs solid protection. A lot of the endpoint devices that were formerly used in offices were brought home to use. They're going to come back. Who knows what they've picked up out there? And so every corporation needs to think about how are we going to certify those devices that are returning to our internal infrastructure. We need to protect ourselves against that. And so endpoint security has amplified in importance to all of us. Now, again, not only are the endpoints something to worry about, but the users. There are tons of users. It's safe to say there are many times more remote users than there ever was before. And so another thing we need to be concerned about is network access control. And in terms of network access control, I'm talking about the fact that not only do we have to authorize and authenticate the user, we also have to analyze the device. We have to prove who the user is, but we also have to prove that the device is what it says it is, and that it is configured properly to be on our network, and that it is secured sufficiently to be on our network. And so that's a lot to be careful about. ultimately, our goal is to prevent unauthorized access to our network ever. This basically represents a sea change, a big new reality in the way we secure our networks. And this is where I kind of want to lead you. This is the old day, okay? But the new day will be identity and access management will be amplified in importance by many, many, many times. This old way is what we like to refer to as the castle and moat approach. The castle is our network. Everything is inside our network. And the castle wall or the moat is that circle around the outside of the blue circle there, okay? That circumference is our network perimeter. It is the moat, the wall. It should be impenetrable. Nobody should be able to get in. And God bless us, we trust everything that's inside that wall. And we don't trust anything that's outside that wall. Well, the problem with that has always been that we do let people through the wall. We allow certain IP addresses from our suppliers, from other associates, our lawyers, our accountants, our customers. You know, they're all being given ways to get through the perimeter, and therefore they could bring some nasty stuff in with them. The reality is that the firewall, the perimeter, the intrusion prevention system, it's not enough anymore. It's not adequate for where we're going. And so instead, we're entering into what we're referring to as the era of zero trust. Not only do you not trust the stuff that's outside your perimeter, you don't trust the stuff that's inside. And that's fine because there are still studies that say that 80% of network exploits come from within the network. So it is best not to trust anything. Never trust, always verify. All the time. I'm talking about continuous verification. So when somebody comes into the network, we verify who they are. We're looking more at their identity than we are at their IP address. We're looking more at their location than their server. You know, and we're looking at the device that they're using to make sure that it is the configuration we're expecting. Basically, the goal is to make sure that the right people, okay, the users that we have authorized are coming through. They have the right level of access. We're talking about like role-based access control, where each person only has access to what they need to get at, and we take all the people in a given category, a given role, and we give them all that so it's easier to control. So the right people have the right level of access to the right resources. You don't want everybody being able to get to everything. In the right context, that they're using everything for the purpose that it was meant for and not for some other purpose. And you protect yourself by assessing this continuously. Now that sounds like a really good mission statement, right? Right people, right level of access, right resources, right context, assessed continuously with the least friction possible. You still have users out there, and they're not going to want to sit there and wait for your system to figure out whether or not it's okay for them to come in. It's kind of like waiting online for the bathroom. It's not a good thing. So we've got to find a way to be continuously assessing this that provides as little friction as possible. Users can get through. It's still very convenient for them, still very efficient. And that's the challenge that's in front of us today. The next question is really, where will we all end up? For some of us, the new reality will be, we'll stay at home. Hey, if you work for Twitter, everybody's staying at home. Nobody's coming back to the office. But if you work for most companies, you may not get to work from home. You may end up coming back to the office. And some people may end up part-time in the office, part-time at home. That'll be their new reality. Will they carry a device with them? Will they have a device at home and a device in the office? There's all kinds of questions that are going to be raised now. What kind of security is necessary? Will they have the same role-based access no matter where they are? How will that be handled? All of this is just now. This is a question that's first now being asked by company after company. And so it's the last question I'll ask, and I'm going to leave this question unanswered. And instead, we're going to answer your questions. John, got any questions for me?
Yeah, I think I got a couple here.
Does anybody see John?
Hi, can you guys hear me? Hello?
John, are you out there?
Oops. Hi, can you guys hear me? Olivia says that she can hear us. So, unfortunately, it sounds like Howard can't hear me. Oh boy, not sure how to. We do have a number of questions. Oh man, and they're really coming in. Hoping Howard can dial back in, maybe.
Can somebody let the operator know that we can't hear each other?
Yeah. Boy, Howard, do you want to? Yeah, please dial in again, Howard. I guess these kind of things happen. But this was an awesome presentation. I have to say, more than I even expected. And I loved Howard's clarification of the difference between a transformation and an upgrade. That was, very helpful and very useful. Also, my favorite pun of the day has to be meat packing plants ground to a halt. So hoping that the technical folks running the show will connect me again with Howard. We have want to remind everybody that along with our awesome content at today's summit, we are giving away a Nintendo Switch, and that'll be coming up during the third session. You have to be present to win. You should be online just for this awesome content, but it as a little motivator will.
Hello, John.
Okay. Hi. Are you back with us?
The operator has connected me back in. Don't know what happened there.
Thank you. I was vamping, and we had a bunch of questions coming in.
Great.
So let's see. Those questions have gone away. What happened there? This is one of those days.
Technology. Don't you love it?
Don't we love it? I was saying how I really loved your clarification of the difference between transformation and upgrade. I think that's very important for people to understand what we're talking about when we use that overused term.
Yeah, it's all. You know what? At the end of the day, it's all about people. That's the reality of it. It's all about people. It's not about the technology itself.
Okay.
Oh, I have the questions here. I can ask myself.
I have them too. I'm sorry, we can get right into them. So
okay.
Our first question here is, how can you ensure security for corporate data when people working at home are using their own devices? Doesn't that open the door to unauthorized data copying? You mentioned you covered some of this in your presentation, but what do you say to this attendee?
Yeah, and that is a huge problem. And a lot of different people have solved it a lot of different ways. I mentioned SASE in the middle of the presentation, that we're hoping that by delivering security to everybody from the cloud, we'll be able to level the playing field in security too. Right now, many companies are simply having their users adhere to company policy. Some are equipping their people with small firewall appliances. There's all kinds of different ways that people are approaching it. Again, it's residential internet, so it's somewhat of a challenge. And I think I've heard some companies were actually, providing VPNs to their users. Of course, VPN is certainly a fairly reliable way to provide as much security as you can.
Fascinating. So how would you help? This is a really good one. How would you help organizations come to the realization that what they had halted was an upgrade and not a transformation? You clarified that, but what are the characteristics and differentiating features of each? Maybe you could, recap a little bit of that.
I guess the core question that I would ask them is, let me ask you, are your people working as efficiently as they were before? And are they working more efficiently? Because the reality is, even if your upgrade was stopped, you were still impacted by the change. Your people are all at home now. You've got to figure out how to use collaboration platforms. You've got to figure out how to use video. You've got to figure out how to get things done even though you're not together. And maybe email and maybe texting. You may have a manager who's sending out emails every hour to everybody to update him. I mean, people adopted all kinds of things, but that's a digital, even if it's worse, that is a digital transformation. It's changing the way people use technology to get done what they need to get done. And so, if God forbid some of us older folks got our wish and everybody returned to pencil and paper, that's a digital transformation.
Well, that's fascinating you should say. One of the questions is, how do you think working from home has affected or changed people?
Oh, boy. And again, this is something that varies person by person. Right? There's no one size fits all. But I think that a lot of people have become a whole lot more self-sufficient. One of the things that I've noticed, one of the things people have told me in conversations we've had, that they realize that there's nobody to turn to now. And so they figure things out more than they used to. One thing that I think has changed a lot is that I think a lot of people have had how to use Google redefined for it.
Right.
So
what do you mean by that?
Well, it's like, if you ask any engineering manager, the guys who run all the techs that go out and repair all the computers, if you ask them where they turn for information on how to fix something, they're all going to answer Google today. Nobody goes back to manuals anymore. Nobody does the, read the manual anymore. They all use Google to get the answers to everything. And I think a lot of people didn't quite fully realize just how extensive the information available to them is. I think some people have probably suddenly realized that they have better writing skills than they thought they did, because they're now writing so much more than they used to. They're thumbing some of it, but they're writing so much more than they used to. I also think that some people have discovered that they need more or less socialization than they thought they did. Enfranchisement, keeping people enfranchised in the company is a big challenge. When you're all together in the office, there's esprit de corps, there's camaraderie, it's all those good things. But when people are home, how do you maintain that? How do you preserve that? And I think for some people, it was extremely difficult, that they're home and they're all alone and there's nobody here and it's terribly lonely. Other people just jumped on video with a friend and had lunch with a friend. I can't tell you how many cups of espresso I've started the morning with a friend over video. It's pleasant. It's comfortable. It's kind of like the way they live in Europe, where they all get together in the morning, sit out at a cafe, except it's over video. So let's have some video cafes. What the heck? I think that we've all, if anything, we've all learned a lot more about ourselves. And I think that's a good thing.
So, kind of a tangential question to that. What, if any, impact will the change have on training for remote workers? I mean, you mentioned that, we're not going to be turning to manuals. I mean, what about the process of getting people up to speed or on board?
I'm absolutely expecting that communications experts are going to get out there with all kinds, that they probably have already, with all kinds of, here's how to be more effective over video. Tons of that. There'll be plenty of people going to their business card printing store and getting communications consultant printed under their names so that they can achieve being a communications consultant. And they're going to go out and they're going to tell you how to be more effective using video, even though it's not something they ever did before. What the heck? I do think that we're going to see, already I think most training is probably delivered online today. I think that more and more learning centers are getting rid of the classroom and simply connecting everybody using a learning platform. There are some great learning platforms out there. This is, if anything, this has accelerated that. So I think the training will be delivered online a lot more. Training will be self-paced a lot more. There'll be different kinds of training. There'll be survival training, how to survive in a solitary world where you're the only person in the house. I think a lot more pets will be adopted, maybe. But, I think the training will change in those ways. I look forward to it. It's going to be interesting.
So this is a fascinating question. I live in Mountain View, right around the corner from the Googleplex, and there's a massive construction going on there, and they've got a new facility downtown. This question is, what kind of disruption can we expect with the impending big quit when these companies, ex-Google, want the workforce back in the physical office? Google isn't investing in all this space to leave it empty.
Ooh. Ooh. The big quit. I like that. Okay, so a little self-revelation here. I left the channel in 2009, and I crossed the chasm to becoming a freelancer. I decided I wanted to fulfill my life stream and become a writer for and about the channel. And one of the things I found in Business Week magazine was a survey that determined that 32% of the American workforce was already in the gig economy. They were working for themselves. And more recently, I saw a stat that suggested that we had crossed the 50-yard line, and it was now 55, I think it was 55.1% of the American workforce is self-employed. That self-employment is the new normal. And you know what? Having been a corporate animal for 40 years and then being a freelancer for 12, 13 years now, I don't know how I did that other thing. So I think that if anything happens, to answer the question directly, and it's is that a great question? Thank you so much for asking that. I think that we're going to see a change that's been happening for a long time now continue and accelerate. And that change is the move from employees to contractors. It is no secret that if you look at the 18,000 people who work for Microsoft, it's about a 50-50 split. 50% of the Microsoft workforce, the last time I looked, were contractors. V-dash, as they call them. And I think that Google will do the same thing. I think that many companies will do the same thing. Now, this will also have an enormous disruptive effect on the insurance business because insurance will no longer be expected to be an employment benefit at all. And we'll finally put it to the Congress, hey, you're going to do the right thing and join the rest of the world. So I think we're going to see a cascade of changes coming out of that, but I do think that the corporations are going to respond to the big quit by simply contracting people. What the heck? Again, I don't need, especially a company like Google, they know they don't need people in the office. Yeah, they built beautiful big playgrounds, but you know what? If they make them available to the contractors may say, hey, heck, I want to go play there. You don't know. You don't know. I think a lot of them are going to have to basically say, oh, whoops. that was a mistake. It's hard. That's hard to forecast, but I do think it's going to continue the march toward the gig economy.
big changes on the offing, and holy mackerel, a whole lot of away from us. We're going to take a short break and be back at in a couple of minutes for the second session of the day, remote workforce optimization and security practices for 2021 and beyond. That session will be presented by consultant, speaker, writer, and 5-time Microsoft MVP, Nathan O'Brien, and hosted by Scott Becker, editorial director for the Converge 360 Group and editor-in-chief of Redmond Channel Partner. Thank you, Howard, for an awesome... thank you, Howard, so much for a great session. And thanks to our sponsor, Okta, for making it possible. Yes, this was one of my faves. Now would be a good time, attendees, to check out those resources on your console provided by Okta. And remember, during today's third session, we will be giving away a Nintendo Switch, so stay tuned. Thanks, Howard. Back in a few.
Thank you, John.
Great, thank you. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for being here. And I want to thank our speakers, my fellow moderators, and of course our sponsor, Okta, for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. So my name is Scott Becker. I'm editorial director of Converge 360, and I'm here to moderate the second session of our Transforming Your Remote Workforce Summit. And this session is called Remote Workforce Optimization and Security Best Practices for 2021 and Beyond. So our speaker for this session is Nathan O'Brien. He's an independent consultant. He's a Microsoft Certified Solutions Master. Excuse me. He's got that MCSM for messaging. He's a 5-time former Microsoft MVP for Office servers and services and he's from Portland, Oregon. So Nathan works as an independent consultant, actively contributes to the Exchange and Office 365 communities by writing articles for several tech websites and his own blog. We're really lucky to have him here for this session, to talk about some of the remote workforce implications and how to optimize for it and secure it. So Nathan, welcome to the session. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Scott, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today, and we're going to talk a little bit about security in the cloud, how this all works, and how we can do some security best practices here. As Scott said, my day job, I'm a consultant. I work with a lot of organizations doing migrations into mostly Microsoft Cloud, but some other stuff there too as well. And I always try to keep everything secure, so I think that's what we're going to talk about here today. I'm going to try and go till about 20 to 15 minutes to the top of the hour, and then after that, we're going to leave a little bit of time for audience questions. So if anyone has any questions at any point, please feel free to put those into the chat window there, and then Scott will bring those up to me there at the end. All right, so limited time here, so let's get started. When I engage with customers on projects, both before and after pandemic, everybody's concerned about security. Security is a huge deal these days, so I think it's always very important to keep security top of mind. And as we're doing that, I think we need to set the right goals for our security. I always try to talk to customers about, making their deployments more secure, not necessarily trying to, eat the whole elephant in one bite. Let's work on taking the right step for our organization incrementally, one at a time, bring everything to be more secure today than it was yesterday. And when we come in tomorrow, we can try and make everything more secure there. So we always want to work towards better security. Your organization currently has some level of security. There's some things you're doing secure, but nothing is ever going to be perfectly secure. Security isn't something that's ever going to be done. We're not going to get to the end goal there. We just have to work on, every day, let's make that attainable goal of making everything more secure. So to that end, I like to talk to customers about, working for better authentication procedures. How I like to do that, how I like to explain that, how I like to kind of break that down is into sort of authentication ladder presentation scenario sort of thing. I like to think about authentication as, let's start at the bottom and move our way up. Let's understand what steps we can take to make all the accounts in our organization more secure, and then what the next step is to increase security for each step along the way. So today I'm kind of going to show you how I think about that authentication ladder, what the rungs are, what we need to do, what the steps we can take to make everything be more secure. And in this today, really I'm speaking in sort of a technology agnostic sort of a way. A lot of what we're going to talk about today applies to many different technology solutions. Of course, I do a lot of work in Microsoft Cloud, so this may kind of seem a little bit more skewed in that direction, but I don't really mean to present this as Microsoft solutions. There are a lot of other vendors that have very similar solutions that work very similar to this. So it may look a little bit Microsoft heavy, but I really mean this all to be agnostic, and all this works for many different vendors' products. And of course, the upper level rungs that we talk about towards the end of my time here may follow different orders for different organizations. But we always want to start at the bottom. I present this authentication ladder idea as starting with the bottom, rung 0, not even really on the ladder yet, but kind of the ground that will put that ladder on is going to be that username and password. Username and password, it's not the best solution for authentication, for securing everything. There are much better ways we can do this, and relying on only username and password has some significant problems that we're going to talk about. But this is really the basis. You need to do this part well before you can get up into the auth ladder. So this is where we're going to start talking. A few things that I like to talk about with that password, especially with customers, and the first one is longer is better. So I like to encourage customers to think about, instead of a password, think about a passphrase. Make a sentence into a word. Whatever that sentence is that makes sense for you, do that. Then kind of think about maybe a capitalization pattern and a special character pattern in positions that make sense to you. I put a couple different examples there at the bottom of the slide. My daughter has a monkey, kind of just that first one, I chose to capitalize the last letter in each word. Put a 92 at the end of it. There's a $sign in there. So kind of a better way to use a longer password, something that users can remember. You're going to remember a nice sentence, make it longer. It doesn't really, it's not really about making it completely a random string of letters and numbers, because those are very hard for users to remember. Although, personally, I use a password vault for hundreds of different passwords, and I use completely random passwords and everything, and I just send them to that password vault. But this is another way that we can make longer passwords sort of into passphrases that users can remember, and they can keep their passwords more secure without using those same passwords that almost everybody uses almost all the time, that really are vulnerable to problems. Current NIST guidance, for passwords, looking at that, it's not really a great idea to force people to change their passwords, every month or every 90 days or something. We find out in security research that really, when you're forcing people to change their password every 30 days, then people will make their passwords that they're using less secure. They're not going to put that effort into remembering really great passwords if they have to remember a new password every month. So, an older password, a long passphrase, like some of the stuff that I showed you earlier, that's going to leave you in a more secure position than trying to have a new short password every month. So let's not force those password pages. Don't force that same complexity. We want users to use good passwords, but kind of when we get into forcing them to use really complex random passwords, it can cause a lot of password resets and passwords that are easy to guess. So people are really unlikely to remember super complex passwords if you make them use too many special characters or that sort of thing. Let's back away from that and think of passwords, teach our users to use passwords in a way that they can use longer, better passwords, without all that forcing them to use all kinds of crazy complexity in there. Also, we find that tools that allow users, when they're logging on, to show themselves a password, allow users to use better and more complex passwords, better passwords, not those passwords that are going to be so easy to guess all the time. So, we want to use tools that allow users to have that little button where they can see the password. But then we also want to teach our users that when they're using that button, they have to be aware of their environment, know who could be looking over their shoulder. You don't want to put your password up on the screen in a situation where other people can see it. So responsible use of tools like this can go a long way to ending up with better passwords in our organizations. Clues. So a lot of password reminders, those answers, what's your mother's maiden name, what's your birthday, what city were you born in. In a world with social media, a lot of that information is really very easy for hackers to find. So be careful about using those sort of password reminder tools. Something that I'll do personally, again, kind of relying on that password vault, but the questions, when I have those password reset questions to create a password, I will do things like I'll make sure that the answer is completely nonsensical to the question. So, what was your first car? And then my answer will be yellow. Where were you born? And then, make the answer something that's just nonsensical, a color or a number, something like that, so that those password reset clues aren't something that somebody can get into your Facebook and look on social media and have good answers to those. So we really want to teach users how to use those password reset clues in a more responsible way that will lead to better password policies. We do want to limit the login attempts so that brute force attacks work as well. This can be kind of cultural to the company, but I think security researchers find that 10 failed attempts is really kind of the max that you want to allow on that. But maybe 3 at the minimum, so that a user can have a bad day or they can fat finger their password a couple times and not get locked out and then have to trigger that help desk ticket before they can log back into that system. So play with that a little bit. Find the number that works good for your organization so that you're not vulnerable to those brute force attacks, but also your users aren't having to open password reset tickets every time they try and log on. So kind of summing up that rung 0, that username and password kind of level, design your password policy around long passphrases. End user education is really important here. Teach your users how to have good secure passwords. I think a password vault is always a good idea. And really the onus is on us as IT professionals and the management of our organizations to make sure that we're teaching our users how to do good password policy, how to keep their stuff secure, and then use the tools that we give them well. Moving up onto rung 1, getting on the ladder of this authentication, making our authentication sessions more secure. I think multi-factor authentication is incredibly key, and it's not used nearly enough. I think there are lots of ways that we can add multi-factor authentication to almost every log-on that users are doing, and this really needs to be done. I looked at a session that Microsoft did last year at the RSA conference, and I pulled some information from that I wanted to share with you here today. In January 2020, Microsoft found 1.2 million compromised accounts in their cloud. You've got a lot of accounts in there, so that's not a super shockingly number, but what really is kind of shocking about that is 99.9% of the compromised accounts they found didn't have multi-factor authentication turned on. So really, if we're looking at cloud accounts, turning on multi-factor authentication, that's going to be a huge step to ensuring that we keep those accounts secure. Just that one step, if that's all we get from this today, turning on multi-factor authentication makes accounts a lot more secure. And it's really shocking how little multi-factor authentication is used. Again, in that same session, Microsoft talked about only 11% of the accounts, enterprise accounts in the Microsoft Cloud, have ever had an MFA claim, have ever had an MFA turned on at all. It's shockingly low. It just shouldn't be that low. 40% of the accounts compromised in January 2020 were compromised by a password spray attack. Again, that can't happen if you have multi-factor authentication. Somebody can't just script out commonly used passwords and jam them against everybody's email addresses to get in. Statistically, 1 in 100 attempts at a password spray attack will work using just 15 of the most common passwords. So, again, it's pretty easy to do that password spray attack. Multi-factor authentication stops that. And then a lot of those password spray attempts focus on legacy authentication protocols. So that's really where we want to focus on and ensure that we're keeping everything secure. Modern authentication, legacy authentication, certainly in the Microsoft Cloud, those are words that we hear a lot. I just wanted to take a second to clarify what that means. Really, modern authentication is just newer authentication protocols, an umbrella term that allows us to do these more complex authentication scenarios beyond just username and password. And then legacy auth is obviously those old protocols that expect just the username and password. So why don't organizations use multi-factor authentication? There's some pretty straightforward reasons why that only 11% of accounts in the Microsoft Cloud have ever had MFA turned on. And I think the biggest reason is almost every organization, certainly most organizations that I work on, if they turned on MFA across all their applications, it just wouldn't work. There would be applications that would break, and that's unfortunate. Unfortunately, I find a lot of organizations kind of have this all or nothing mentality about it. If we turn on MFA, it's going to break stuff, so we can't do it. Instead of doing what they can to make it work, they're not going the whole way on that, and that's unfortunate. I really think it's important that we start pushing towards that. Of course, users don't like change. Users don't like being told there's a new process they have to do to go through logon. That can be a challenge that we, as IT professionals and the management of these companies, really have to go through, but it's something we have to do. And of course, short-term business needs are always going to be more important than security. If it's, you have your accounting department needs to run the books to get that report, that quarterly report done, that's just not going to be okay if people can't log into that accounting system and get that done. So, we're going to find in cases like that, people are just going to step away from multi-factor authentication if it's interfering with critical business needs. And then it's just not going to get revisited. So we really have to make sure that we understand how important securing these accounts are, make sure we keep that clear to the management, and we have to keep pushing forward on making these changes and keeping everything secure. When we're talking about multi-factor authentication, I think turning on multi-factor authentication is important, but when we do that, we do have to remember that multi-factor authentication can include a whole bunch of things, and they're not all equal. Of course, it's better to have multi-factor authentication on than not, but some of these, SMS specifically, if you're turning on multi-factor authentication and then using SMS as that multi-factor authentication, there have been a number of exploits against SMS, MFA, authentication. So we definitely like to encourage people to use those good authenticator apps that are a completely separate channel from your computer. Think about the multi-factor authentication. You don't want the second factor to have and to share anything in common with your first factor. You don't want it to be the same equipment or say the communication method. You want to make sure it's separate. You want to make sure it's completely secure. And then, of course, at the end there, M means multi, so it doesn't just have to be two. If we're really trying to secure important data, we can add multiple different types of multi-factor authentication into that authentication flow and hopefully keep that data secure. So how do we enforce multi-factor authentication with kind of these hesitancies that I talked about? Not every application supports it. Users don't always like to make that change. I think the first and most important thing in here is that we have to make sure that the management of our organizations really understand the threat. They understand how important it is that we secure these accounts, that we keep everything secure and safe and move forward. Once management understands that, we get their approval and we make a plan to implement MFA. We have to keep pushing forward on that. We do have to be ready to adjust that plan. When you start implementing your plan, any plan can take hits during that implementation. We may find problems with our plan, things that don't work as we expect. We have to understand those problems, be ready to fix them, and keep moving forward. We have to keep pushing. Super important, get that multi-factor authentication turned on. After that, let's move forward to another rung on the authentication ladder, device authentication. So while, users log on with their username and password, and then we secure that authentication with a multi-factor authentication system. Besides that, device authentication can be very important. Control which devices we allow to connect into our organizational data. Office 365 and many other systems, allow us to verify that this device belongs to this person, and they can authenticate and then be authorized to access this data with that device. So think about ways that you can add device authentication and ensure that the right people are using the right devices to log on. Even if you have the username and password for John Smith, who has access to X, Y, and Z data, make sure that John Smith is authenticating from the right device. Of course, bring your own device scenarios can make this more difficult, but not impossible. There are tools that we can, easily manage, not our devices. Things like Intune, endpoint management in Office 365, for example. There are ways that we can bring your own devices into there and ensure that we know what devices that users are authenticating to, with the user still preserving, control of that device. It's their device and they have control of it. We just have minimal controls that allow us to ensure that the correct people are logging on with the correct devices. Another rung up after that device authentication that we can use is conditional access. Authentication flows these days, we have the ability through many different tools to change that authentication flow based on the situation that authentication is trying to happen in. So if a user is logging in from the office, maybe we don't have to require them to use multi-factor authentication. We know the user is, authenticating from within our office building, so maybe we can make that authentication flow a little easier for that user. Whereas if the user is logging on from home, we want to change that authentication flow, maybe require multi-factor authentication or require a VPN or require different steps to go into that authentication from different locations. Or different authentication flows for different applications. We have the ability to create that sort of thing too. So the user is just logging on to their email. Maybe we have company policies that we know email data is not the high level of security, but we don't want users to be able to log on to a specific SharePoint site that has documentation that we keep more secure there without going through some extra steps. So when they try and access that SharePoint site, they have to use multi-factor authentication, or they can only access it from specific IP addresses, or they have to use multi-factor authentication and access from specific addresses and use specific devices. We can add and build these kind of authentication flows to keep our data secure and make sure that everybody is using our data properly, keeping everything safe and secure. Impossible travel, another condition we can think about there. The user logs on from Chicago in the morning, probably not going to be logging on from New York 15 minutes later. Moving up to another rung on the authentication ladder, passwordless authentication. Authentication without a password at all. Passwords aren't that great. That's how we've been getting into computer systems for as long as there have been computer systems. But in the recent years, really a lot of vendors have started developing ways that we can get in without having to do that password in at all, and still have multi-factor authentication. For instance, I walk into my office here at home, I look at my Surface laptop, it sees me through Windows Hello. That is a multi-factor authentication logon there into my laptop. It identifies my biometric information, my picture, not just a picture there. There's heat signatures and more that go into that, and the device. I have to be doing that from a specific device for it to work. So there are ways that we can do authentication without passwords at all that still allow us to get into what we need to and still verify that the proper person is authenticating into the proper data that we want them to be able to have. Of course, of concern always with any sort of biometric logon is you can't reset your passwords or you can't reset this biometric data, no matter how complicated, what kind of cool features you're using, retina scans, whatever they are. That sort of information that the user has can't be reset. So if it's compromised, that can be a problem to using that biometric authentication. Moving up to another rung here. There's my advanced button. Device compliance. So we want to make sure that the devices, obviously, we can verify that users logging on, as we talked about, with devices that we want to. We know that this person is authenticating with this device, but we also have abilities. There are tools that allow us to ensure that device that they're logging on is and remains compliant with our policies. So maybe that device needs to be patched to a certain level. Maybe we only accept users to authenticate with specific operating systems. I don't want anybody logging into my data using Windows XP. It's a 20-plus-year-old operating system. People shouldn't be using it, but people are using it. It's still out there in enterprises. I'm working with a customer right now. I just identified a bunch of Windows XP devices in their domain that they had no idea about. Highly unsecure devices shouldn't be used at all. So this is really where device compliance can come in and help us out. Ensure that if users are going to log into our systems, they are up-to-date patched, they have antivirus, maybe drive encryption. Drive encryption can be, a huge important part of a device compliance scenario. So that if the user does authenticate into our data, they do need to download some data and keep it on their machine for whatever reasons, but then they lose that device. We know that the device drive on there is encrypted, and when they leave it sitting, on the airplane seat next to them, that data isn't going to be lost, or it's not going to turn up in another, leak. Device compliance can also check for dangerous applications, which I think is super important in bring your own device scenarios. Ensure that users aren't installing known bad applications that can end up leaking data or being used to compromise our environments. Device compliance allows us to keep checking for that and ensure that that's all secure. Session risk is another rung, another addition that we can make to this authentication flow. So using a lot of the information that we've already talked about together during that authentication flow, we can ensure that the specific session, user's authentication session, is under a risk level that our organization finds acceptable. And this can be based on a number of the signals that we've already talked about. So we know that this user has a good password. We know that this user is using multi-factor authentication. We know that this user has a device that's authenticated. We know that that device is compliant. We can add all these signals together, weight them, and then end up with a session risk, and then make decisions on how that authentication flow is going to work based on that session risk. So maybe if the session has a risk that's over a certain point, we want to make those users reset their password, and we want to make them call into help desk, talk to somebody. Or, if that session is too risky, we don't want to allow it at all. Make sure that the user understands that because your device is not compliant, because you're logging on from an unsecure location, because your password isn't good enough. Your session is going to be too risky, so we're not going to allow it in this situation. Really, the session risk signals can be super important to making sure that we have good, secure environments, that we're keeping all our data secure, and everything is safe, and we have good security practices there. Kind of the last one that I wanted to talk about, kind of the last rung on here, and there's a lot of development. I'm hearing things about user behavior authentication. So there are a lot of different signals that we can use that users, the way that users behave can ensure that the proper person is actually using the account that we provision. Maybe not necessarily just your signature, but how you write your signature, signing in on a screen. That sort of gesture thing. There are a lot of user behavior signals that I'm seeing work into authentication flows that can help organizations secure these sessions. And this is some really good technology that I think is going to get us to a point beyond usernames and passwords where we can really secure these authentication sessions and make sure that everybody has a good experience getting into the data that we want them to, but we still keep our data secure. So that's kind of the speech that I like to give to organizations when I'm talking about how to keep secure, how to make sure that their authentication sessions are well secured. So let's start using more of these tools and keep our authentication great. We do have some questions here. Scott, do we have questions that we want to address?
Sure do, Nathan. Let's go straight into one from Andy, who's really interested in the conversation about MFA. And he made an observation that I'd like to get your thoughts on. But you talked about how difficult it can be to get people to adopt MFA because it breaks applications. And Andy notes that after being hacked, we've turned it on, and every app I use now requires that additional step because he doesn't want to deal with another hack and all the changes to everything that happens as a result of a hack. So I just thought that was an interesting perspective. A lot of the applications can break when you use MFA, but if you don't use MFA and your organization gets hacked, everything's broken. Or you have all kinds of problems.
Right. I completely agree, and this is a fight that I end up fighting with customers, or I don't want to say fighting, but there's arguments that I end up making with customers quite a lot. But we know that MFA is not very widely used. I mean, again, looking at those accounts in the Microsoft Cloud, 11% of the accounts in the Microsoft Cloud have ever had an MFA claim against them. I know everybody says our organization is secure and we're using it, but that number is shockingly low. So, yeah, it's important to use, but again, when your accounting software doesn't support that, what's more important? A potential hack that could happen sometime later, or getting the quarterly reports in that have to be in by law tomorrow. Organizations are gonna make that immediate choice. So we have to keep making sure that everybody understands the risk. Have to keep talking about it to make sure it's clear to our management, and then we have to keep pushing on these things. Maybe it's not something that's going to happen immediately. Maybe it's not going to happen immediately for all users, but we have to make as much progress as we can on this. I find it incredibly important. Yeah.
Yeah, no, great points. So you talked a bit about password vaults in the rung zero phase of the conversation, and Karen was asking, what password vaults do you recommend?
Yeah,
and I've got a follow-on to that, but go ahead with that, and then I've got kind of a follow-up to that.
So I don't want to specifically endorse anybody. Personally, I use LastPass. But I think what's important in choosing a password vault or looking at the features of it is something that your data is kept in the cloud, in a web browser, that you can access from different devices, different scenarios, different passwords, but you want your data to be encrypted before it leaves your device. So do your research on password vaults. There are a number of them: LastPass, 1Password. There are a lot of good password vaults out there. I definitely recommend using that as much as you can to secure your passwords. But even a notepad file that, if you keep that encrypted in OneDrive, that can be better, or it can be a step in the right direction. Maybe not the best solution, but I really encourage users or people to find good ways to use good passwords and look at the holistic situation with your password. And password vaults like LastPass you can use for free. There is a free level to that. Of course, they have higher level subscription, and certainly they have enterprise options to that I highly recommend. But find a way to use good passwords, and if that means a password vault, find a way to use something that is keeping your passwords all secure, not having them be unencrypted ever in that chain, and have them in a way that you can access from different devices in different situations. I think that's very important. You see some companies will use a password vault, but that'll be internal. It's just available on the internal network for the company and just available on their computer. So you have to be logged into your computer before you can get your password out of that password vault, which means you have to have, a memorable password to get in to your computer itself. I don't know any of my passwords. I have hundreds of passwords, and I don't know any of them. They're all big long strings of total random letters and numbers. I think that's a good solution, and we have to work on pushing more users and more organizations to do things like that better. Again, baby steps. Make sure it's something that users can actually use. Make sure it's secure, and keep pushing forward on it.
Yeah, that was kind of my follow-up, and you touched on it a little bit, but it seems like those password vaults are primarily a personal solution for users, because they're combining maybe their work and their personal accounts together in the password manager or in the vault. Is there anything that companies can do? And you talked about the limitations of sort of an enterprise approach, and that it's inside the computer to start with. Is there anything that companies can do? I mean, is it just training and showing people how they work and encouraging them to do it, or are there other best practices that you've used or you've tried?
Yeah, certainly. I think training is definitely a very important step that's far too much overlooked. So make sure that we train our users. But even solutions, all the online password vaults I'm aware of, they have a free level for personal use that users can use, but there are higher level enterprise solutions to all these password vaults that organizations can purchase, and I definitely recommend that. Purchase those enterprise password vaults, and then encourage your users to use them not only for their enterprise passwords, but also for their own personal passwords. The problem with having a password vault and then having users, telling users use this for work, well, people are going to use the same password for multiple websites. That's just how people are. People want to get into Facebook or Twitter or whatever that solution is, and if they have a password, even if it's a really great password stored in a password vault that they have access to, they're going to use that same password in other situations. And then when there's a leak from something that isn't even your responsibility, it's not even your organization system, it could be Facebook or Twitter or whatever, that password gets leaked from there. It's not that hard to associate that password with a user and then use that to get into your corporate resources. Social media makes that way too easy these days. We know where you work because you have a LinkedIn profile. We know what systems that company uses. Not that hard to find out. So one leak of a password from a big popular site or something can leak passwords that are used in multiple places and make your data unsecure. So really encourage your users to use those password vaults. I think it's a great idea for organizations to purchase those and make them available for their users and encourage their users to use them for everything, so that people are using different passwords for every different site, every different authentication login system, so we don't have that leak credential problem.
Okay. Hey, switching gears here, we've got a question from Daniel. Compliance that has structures for passwords and other security. Sometimes that doesn't match what you're recommending. How do we change if our tools show it as a non-compliant setting?
So,
thoughts on that?
So for me, I always start with the current NIST guidance. I believe there was updates to the NIST guidance earlier this week. You can, do a quick Google search for NIST password guidance. It'll show you. There's a nice paper there that explains what the current guidance is for ensuring good passwords. Start from there. Look at what they're recommending there. That's going to be updated. I think it's quarterly, so it may change. But it's something we have to do the work. The password guidance changes because the situation in the world changes. It used to be we would recommend best practice would always be change your password every 30 days. Well, we find out security researchers looking at how users use passwords, where compromised passwords come in, how that all works, is that if users are forced to change their password every 30 days, they use simpler passwords because they have to remember them. And when they're using those simpler passwords, more standard passwords, even passwords that meet many standard complexity requirements, stuff like password with a capital P and an @ symbol and instead of an O, a 0, that can meet a lot of complexity requirements, but it's still a password that's on that list of very, very short list of passwords that are widely used and easy to guess. So a password spray attack will find passwords that meet those complexity requirements, but aren't really complex or aren't very good. So, really look at the NIST guidance. It's always evolving and updating. Figure out how to have a good password policy from that guidance. And then don't be afraid to update your organization's password policy. It's work. It's going to require user training. It's going to trigger some help desk cases when you update that password policy to meet new guidance. But I think it's worth it to ensure that our data is secure.
Great, gotcha. Let's see. Robert likes your point about not mixing personal passwords, versions with their work stuff. He says he informs his users of that all the time. Here's a comment from Zoltan, which is like looking forward a little bit. But with the imminent arrival of quantum computing, what's coming to replace the current authentication mechanisms, which will be ineffective against quantum computation? What's your view on that one?
Yeah, so of course, always predicting the future is difficult, but I think a lot of what I'm seeing, that rung 7 that I talked about, user behavior, I think is going to be super important as we get into stronger and more processor intensive, more resource intensive authentication methods. I think we're going to get to a point where we're seeing more user behavior based authentication. So I stand in front of my computer and do a specific gesture, or even signing my name on a touch screen. Not necessarily that it's not necessarily looking at the end product of that signature, because that's fairly easy to copy, but the process of how you sign out your name, really research shows us that sort of stuff can be very different person to person, even if the two signatures end up looking exactly alike. Kind of aspects of that like pressure and, just different gestures. So a lot of that user behavior authentication, I think, is where we're going to see this going to. I see a lot of research firms working on that sort of stuff, and I think that's where authentication is really going to improve in the next few years, is user behavior-based authentication, stuff that's really hard to copy. I've even seen studies in a lot of cars now will have kind of black boxes in them recording how somebody drives. I've seen insurance companies looking at in identifying who is actually driving the car based on how they use the brake pedal. It turns out different people use the brake pedal very differently when they're driving. So insurance companies can use kind of this recorded data in your car based on how you're hitting the brake pedal, when you're hitting the brake pedal. So I think that user behavior is going to be a big authentication tool in the future, coming up pretty soon.
Sort of like a behavioral fingerprint almost.
Yeah.
Interesting. Another question here: how do you manage using a complex password with Windows Hello and needing to log in to say the Azure portal or Office portal from a new device?
I think it's pretty straightforward and fairly reasonable. I have an Office 365 account, and that I log into, my personal tenant with all the time. That password for that account is, I don't know how big. It's huge, and it's random, and it's complex. Just as a guess, it's probably in the 15 to 25 character range. It's completely random, and it's complete gibberish. I just don't type it in ever. It is very rare that I have to type that in. I walk in front of my computer, and because I've set up Windows Hello, you do have to type it in once during that setup process. But I walk in front of my computer and it sees me, so I don't have to remember. I don't even have to go to my vault and get that big password out. My authentication is secure, and there's a really complex password behind it that I can use if I really have to use. There are situations still where you end up having to use those passwords. But a big complex password, kind of the pain in the butt of typing in that big complex password can be mitigated with tools like Hello, where we're doing biometric authentication.
Okay. And last question. This one is from Candace, and you touched on some of this before with MFA, but there's been so much interest in the audience questions on MFA. Candace is asking, how do you suggest getting C-suite buy-in to MFA when they don't like the inconvenience of it? And so, I guess it's sort of a parting shot. Any best practices or arguments that you've found that are effective?
Yeah, what I do when I'm standing in front of customers, and it's always an easy sell. Hey, let's implement. You're not using MFA. Let's implement it. Everybody nods and smiles. And then you get to the implementation part of it, and it only takes, one executive who can't get in because he forgot his authenticator token or whatever. That sort of stuff happens all the time. Or one important application, your accounting software doesn't support it to really derail those projects. So I always like to lead with good statistics. That 11% of accounts in the Microsoft Cloud have ever had an MFA authentication, or 99.9% of the compromised accounts that Microsoft finds don't have MFA enabled. Really find those facts, keep them updated, and communicate that to management and make them understand how important this is. And then when you make your implementation plan, make sure that everybody understands it's not all going to be roses. Everything's not going to work perfectly. There's going to be bumps along the way. We'll be there to work out those bumps with you. When somebody needs to get into the accounting software to do the quarterly books, we'll be there to make sure that they can actually get in. Everything works for them, but we do need to turn up this additional security to keep our data secure.
Gotcha. All right, super. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. But thanks again, Nathan. Great presentation, and thanks for taking all the questions. To the audience, thanks for all the questions that you guys had. And for Nathan, this has been a great session.